2020 was the year that professional wrestling, and to a lesser extent the entire world, changed forever. The pandemic forced us all inside and made us go a little bit crazy, but thankfully we had the ever-stable world of professional wrestling to help keep us sane. Well, actually, no, we didn't, because WWE also decided to go absolutely bonkers during this time. They threw a load of wacky ideas at the wall, and while some of them stuck, the Boneyard and Firefly Funhouse matches come to mind, the rest of them slowly slid down the wall, leaving a horrible, smelly stain as they went. But which of 2020's stinkers stunk the most? Well, that's why we're here today. Before we get started, it's important to note that we tried not to include a lack of crowd in the decision-making for this list. The pandemic wasn't the roster's fault, we assume anyway, so we will do our best to not hold any empty arena matches in too much disregard. With that out of the way, I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are the 10 worst WWE matches of 2020. Join us. Number 10, Braun Strowman vs. Bray Wyatt at Money in the Bank. Apologies to any Bray Wyatt fans out there, obviously he's brilliant, but he's also in this video quite a lot. This Universal Championship match from Money in the Bank saw Bray Wyatt do battle with his former acolyte, no, not those ones, reigning champion Braun Strowman. This was Strowman's first major program since winning the title at WrestleMania, so it needed to be a good showing. Unfortunately though, it wasn't, although you'd probably already worked that out because it's on this list. The match kept getting interrupted by Bray's spooky puppet brigade, who are effective in the Firefly Funhouse, but pretty much nowhere else. Thankfully, Braun also got in on the mind games, putting on his old black sheep mask and convincing his former leader that he had rejoined him. Psych! It was all a ruse, leading Braun to power slam Bray for the win. Whilst the in-ring action itself wasn't awful, everything surrounding it was. The spookiness of the Fiend was already being booked in a repetitive fashion, and this match was the first in a long series of missteps between Wyatt and Strowman. We would tell you what they are now, but we don't want to swamp you with information. Do you get it? Number 9, Randy Orton vs. The Fiend at TLC. Wyatt's second entry took place at 2020's final pay-per-view, TLC. It was supposed to be the blow-off match between him and Randy Orton, who had been feuding since October. However, as anyone who has seen our worst matches of 2021 list will know, this was far from the end of the feud. Due to each man's antics leading up to the show, including Randy locking Bray in a box and then setting it on fire, this match was made a Firefly Inferno match, where you had to set your opponent alight in order to win. It's classic pro wrestling. Flaming sticks, flaming belts, flaming rocking chairs. This match had it all, except for good wrestling. It definitely didn't have that. The match ended when Randy Orton, the good guy, set the Fiend on fire, hit him with an RKO, and then poured gasoline all over his body before lighting it. Yet again, this match was ruined by all the spooky nonsense. The fact that it ended with a babyface burning a man alive, well, didn't help either. Number 8, Johnny Gargano vs. TOMMASO Ciampa on NXT. This will be a controversial one. From lovable teammates in DIY to bitter enemies waging war in the main event of TakeOver New Orleans, Johnny Gargano and TOMMASO Ciampa had one of the best feuds in NXT history. If only WWE had taken the advice of hit musical act Fuel and left the memories alone. Sadly, they didn't do this. Instead, they kept stretching and stretching the story until it finally snapped during a nearly hour-long cinematic match nicknamed One Final Beat. Taking place on an April 2020 episode of NXT, the two men battered the stuffing out of each other all over an undisclosed location. This is the one time we're going to mention a lack of crowd in this list, because without the noise of an audience, this match took itself far too seriously, to the extent that it was hard to properly get invested in the action. The bout ended when Candice LeRae seemingly turned on her husband by kicking him square in the nuts, only to then do the same thing to Ciampa. Why not just kick Ciampa? Why pretend that you've taken his side? The whole thing was overly complicated, overly dramatic, and a blemish on one of the best pieces of wrestling storytelling of the past 2 decades. Number 7, the Women's Elimination Chamber at Elimination Chamber. The Elimination Chamber is an inherently exciting gimmick. 6 guys or gals locked inside a vicious structure where they have to destroy all of their opponents in order to leave. Sign me the heck up. However, often WWE finds a way to disappoint, and that is exactly what they did in the main event of the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view in 2020. This 6-woman chamber match was for a shot against Becky Lynch for the Raw Women's Championship at WrestleMania 36. It started out alright, with some decent wrestling between Natalya, Ruby Riott, and Sarah Logan. Then Shayna Baszler got in, and things went a bit weird. Baszler cut through the other women like a hot knife through butter, eliminating all 3 in quick fashion. She then did nothing for 5 minutes, waiting for Liv Morgan's pod to open before quickly eliminating her. She then did the exact same thing to Asuka to win. So the main thing about this match was that it was structured all wrong. We've got absolutely no problem with Shayna being built up as a dominant threat. In fact, that is fantastic. But surely she should have come in last and tore through everyone like a hurricane. Instead, she spent most of her time standing around like a total plonker. Good job, WWE. Oh, and she ended up losing at Mania too. Number 6, Edge vs Randy Orton at WrestleMania 36. The former members of Rated RKO had one of the most heated rivalries of anyone heading into WrestleMania 36. Orton had viciously attacked Edge upon his return to Raw, delivering a vicious concerto to the Canadian's famously bad neck. This set up a last man standing grudge match between the two. Sadly, the last man standing stipulation applied mostly to the show's viewership, who struggled to stay awake during this long, grueling slog. For the better part of 40 minutes, Orton and Edge roamed around the backstage area, hitting each other with stuff like they were both playing SmackDown Here Comes the Pain. The rules of the match didn't help things either, as there were constant pauses in the action while the referee tried to count either man out. Mercifully, Edge ended Orton's night with a concerto and put us all out of our misery. The combination of this match being one of the most hyped on the show and one of the most disappointing is what puts it on this list. Edge and Orton would have benefited hugely from just having a normal 20-minute no-holds-barred match. Instead, we got this bloated thing that absolutely nobody is eager to revisit. Number 5, Brock Lesnar vs Ricochet at Super ShowDown. Goldberg had an 86-second match with Brock Lesnar at Survivor Series 2016, and pretty much everybody loved it. Ricochet lasted 4 whole seconds longer at Super ShowDown 2020, and everybody hated it. What gives? Well, for one, the first match didn't take place in Saudi Arabia, which usually helps. Secondly, Goldberg actually beat Brock in his match. And thirdly, Goldberg didn't look like a complete and utter chump when facing the Beast. Ricochet had looked pretty good in the build-up to this one, beating Bobby Lashley and Seth Rollins in a triple threat to earn the opportunity. He had also whacked Brock in the balls during the Royal Rumble match, allowing Drew McIntyre to eliminate him. Unfortunately, low blows don't weaken the Beast, they only make him angry. Lesnar absolutely devoured poor Rick at Super ShowDown, dominating the entire match before pinning him with a single F5. We've all seen Lesnar have good matches with smaller opponents, but the booking clearly wasn't bothered about keeping Ricochet even remotely strong here. Instead, he got utterly buried and hasn't really had a whiff of the main event scene ever since. Number 4, Braun Strowman vs Bray Wyatt at the horror show at Extreme Rules. Bray and Braun's sequel was more akin to Jaws than The Terminator, as it had a far inferior sequel. Off the back of their stinker at Money in the Bank, someone decided it would be a good idea to have Strowman and Wyatt battle again, this time in something called a Wyatt Swamp Fight. The two men took a trip back to their old haunt for this cinematic match. Highlights of the bizarre spectacle included Braun fighting off some masked men, one of whom turned out to be himself, a vision of Alexa Bliss attacking Braun with a snake, Bray getting chokeslammed into a boat, and both wiggling around in the swamp before Bray caught Braun with the mandible claw and transformed into the Fiend. So, who won the match? Why did all that stuff happen? What was the point of this? The answer to all 3 of those questions is nobody knows and nobody cares. The swamp fight was spooky nonsense at its finest, so bad it was almost good. Note that I said almost there, because calling this match good would be an insult to all good things everywhere. Number 3, the TUWAIQ Trophy Gauntlet match at Super ShowDown. The TUWAIQ Mountain is a rock formation just outside of the Saudi capital, Riyadh. WWE decided to honor this national landmark by naming a really bad match after it. Let's start with the fact that R-Truth, God bless him, almost won the damn thing, beating 3 people including Bobby Lashley and Andrade. Nothing against Truth, but come on. We should also mention that AJ Styles really should have won the thing, as he beat R-Truth as the last named entrant, but his moment was ruined when The Undertaker appeared out of nowhere to hit a chokeslam on AJ and win a match he wasn't even in. And the icing on the cake? Undertaker didn't even take the trophy he had just won with him when he left. So why did you do any of this, Undertaker? Please explain yourself. Everything about this match was confusing, from the participants to the layout to the finish. It was all one big convoluted way of setting up AJ Styles versus The Undertaker at WrestleMania, but I can think of about a million different ways to get there without doing any of this. Also, how much money did they spend on that trophy? And where is it now? Could use a new paperweight. Number 2, Seth Rollins versus Rey Mysterio at the Horror Show at Extreme Rules. Seth Rollins is a vicious soul, isn't he? He once tried to kill Edge with a curb stomp, he once drove Dean Ambrose's head through a bunch of cinder blocks, and he also pulled Rey Mysterio's eye out. At the Horror Show at Extreme Rules, Rollins and Mysterio competed in the first, and hopefully last, eye for an eye match, in which the objective was to remove your opponent's eye. Yep, in kayfabe, WWE officially sanctioned a match where permanent mutilation wasn't just allowed, but required. The actual work in this match was decent, of course it was, look who's in it, but no amount of good wrestling could overcome how this bout ended. Seth somehow used the edge of the steel ring steps to pop Rey's eye out before he then threw up everywhere. Once again, in kayfabe, legendary luchador Rey Mysterio now only has one eye, except it's back now, I think. I'm not sure. Why did they do all this again? This whole match was really silly, and the finish was cartoonishly bad in execution. In fact, I wish I had been in this match so I could remove my own eyes and never have to see it again. Number 1, Goldberg versus The Fiend at Super ShowDown. Obviously. If The Fiend versus Seth Rollins at Hell in a Cell was the first nail in the character's coffin, then this main event of Super ShowDown 2020 was the last. Instead of the big win he desperately needed, The Fiend lost for the first time ever to Goldberg after just 3 minutes and a botched jackhammer. This completely killed any momentum that The Fiend had left. Not only did he lose, but he lost to an old man in the blink of an eye. Sorry, Ray. And The Fiend wasn't the only one to suffer because of this, as droves of fans turned against Goldberg for being the one to bury one of the most exciting new characters in years. So why did this happen? Well, to set up Goldberg versus Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 36, a match that didn't end up happening because of the pandemic. Nice to see it was all worth it then. The only upside to this was that it freed The Fiend up to have the Firefly Funhouse match with John Cena at WrestleMania. Other than that, everything about it was simply dreadful, and there is no doubt in our minds that it was the worst WWE match to take place in all of 2020.